She is 24 years old, a graduate of Harvard, holding multiple degrees from one of the most prestigious universities on the planet. And for more than a year, she has not been able to land a single job. After commencement, instead of moving into a downtown apartment or starting a career, she moved back into her parents' house in Atlanta, unemployed, refreshing job boards, and rewriting resumes that no human being may ever read. The irony is almost cruel. For generations, Harvard represented the safest bet in American education. If you made it there, you made it. Or at least that was the story people told. She is not an outlier. She is not unlucky. She is not alone. According to the data cited in the original reporting, roughly 23% of Harvard students were jobless 3 months after graduating. Not underemployed, not working part-time, fully unemployed. That number would have been unthinkable even a decade ago. Today, it barely raises an eyebrow among career counselors, who have quietly lowered expectations across the board. This is the moment where the American myth starts to crack. The promise was simple and endlessly repeated. Study hard, get into a good school, earn the degree, the job will follow. Parents took on debt, students took on loans, universities raised tuition. Everyone agreed it was worth it because education was insurance. What happens when that insurance stops paying out? It would be comforting to blame a single villain. Artificial intelligence, lazy graduates, a weak economy. But the reality is more unsettling. This is not a story about Harvard losing its shine. It is a story about the rules of the labor market changing so completely that even the most credentialed candidates are now disposable. In earlier decades, elite graduates were chased. Large companies fought each other to secure top talent. Offers came before diplomas. Salaries were strong enough to build a life. Today, the power dynamic has inverted. Employers are no longer competing for candidates. Candidates are competing for visibility. Even at the very top, what makes this moment especially destabilizing is not just the unemployment itself, but the psychological whiplash. These graduates did everything they were told to do. They followed the path exactly as designed, and when they reached the end, the door did not open. It simply disappeared. This is not a personal failure. It is a systemic one. And Harvard graduates are not the exception that proves the rule. They are the warning signal. If the smartest, most credentialed students in the country cannot convert education into opportunity, the problem is no longer about individual effort. It is about a labor market that no longer behaves the way Americans were promised it would. The instinctive explanation is seductive because it feels modern. People say this is happening because companies stopped hiring, or because artificial intelligence has taken the jobs, or because the economy is quietly collapsing under the surface. None of those explanations survive even a basic look at the data. Companies are hiring. Job openings have not vanished. In fact, over the past few years, the number of posted positions has risen sharply and, in some sectors, has more than doubled compared to pre-pandemic levels. On paper, this should be a job seeker's market. In reality, it has become something closer to a feeding frenzy, with too many participants and too few actual meals. The real problem is not demand, it is oversupply. The United States has produced a historically large pool of highly educated workers all competing for the same narrow slice of white-collar roles. A few decades ago, this imbalance did not exist. Fewer people went to college, fewer people had degrees. Employers treated elite graduates as scarce assets. If a company did not move quickly, another one would. Hiring was urgent. Today, urgency has vanished. Recent labor market data shows the broader U.S. job market slowing even as openings remain high, with unemployment drifting upward and hiring becoming more selective rather than expansive. Employers are posting roles, but delaying decisions, freezing headcount, or running extended interview cycles without making offers. On the outside, it looks like opportunity. On the inside, it is paralysis. This is where the misunderstanding deepens. People see job listings and assume jobs are being created. But a listing is not a commitment. It is a signal. Sometimes it is a weak signal. Sometimes it is noise. The modern hiring process allows companies to advertise roles indefinitely at almost no cost. There is no longer any pressure to decide quickly, or at all. Candidates, meanwhile, interpret silence as personal failure. The labor market has quietly shifted from scarcity to abundance, but only on one side. There is an abundance of applicants, an abundance of resumes, an abundance of degrees. Employers know this, and they act accordingly. When hundreds or thousands of qualified candidates apply for a single role, the incentive to move fast disappears. The leverage sits entirely with the company. Surveys released in recent weeks indicate that many firms are intentionally slowing hiring, despite economic stability, prioritizing cost control and flexibility over expansion, especially in entry-level and early career roles. This is not a recession in the traditional sense. It is a strategic stall. And stalls are brutal for new graduates because time works against them. For Harvard graduates and everyone else entering the workforce, this oversupply means something simple but devastating. Being qualified is no longer impressive. Being exceptional is no longer enough. You are no longer competing against a few peers. You are competing against an invisible crowd that never stops refreshing the same job listings you are. The promise of education assumed a market that rewarded effort with opportunity. That market no longer exists in the form people recognize. And as long as supply keeps growing faster than trust, speed, and commitment on the hiring side, even the most elite credentials will struggle to break through the noise. For decades, a college degree functioned as a signal. It told employers that you were disciplined, capable, and worth training. That signal is now badly diluted. A bachelor's degree, once a differentiator, has become a baseline requirement. Around 70% of job listings now demand one, even for roles that historically did not. Yet only about 30% of American adults actually hold a bachelor's degree. On paper, that imbalance should give graduates leverage. In practice, it has done the opposite. The expansion of higher education flooded the market with credentials faster than the economy could absorb them. Universities responded to demand by enrolling more students, raising tuition, and promising employability. Employers responded by raising expectations. The degree stopped being proof of readiness and started being proof of entry. If you did not have one, you were filtered out automatically. If you did have one, you were placed into an overcrowded queue. This is credential inflation in action. As more people obtain the same qualification, its signaling power erodes. Employers then demand more signals. Internships, certifications, graduate degrees, portfolios, recommendations. What used to be optional extras are now treated as mandatory. The ladder keeps getting taller, but the first rung is already out of reach for many. Recent data shows that student loan balances remain near record highs, while real wages for early career workers have failed to keep pace with inflation, meaning new graduates are entering the job market more educated, more indebted, and financially weaker than previous generations at the same stage of life. Education was sold as an investment. The return profile has changed. There is a quiet irony here. The same companies that complain about talent shortages are often the ones narrowing their hiring criteria to absurd levels. By treating degrees as filters rather than indicators of potential, employers have created a system that screens for conformity, not capability. A Harvard diploma no longer guarantees attention. It simply confirms eligibility to compete. This shift has reshaped how young Americans experience adulthood. In previous generations, graduation marked a transition into independence. Today, it often marks a return home. Living with parents is no longer a personal embarrassment. It is a structural outcome. Degrees stack up. Applications pile up. Careers stall before they begin. Recent surveys of young workers show a growing belief that higher education no longer delivers the economic security it once promised, even among graduates of top-tier institutions. That belief is not driven by ideology. It is driven by experience. When the most prestigious credentials in the country cannot reliably open doors, the issue is no longer about motivation or work ethic. It is about a labor market that has reset the value of education without renegotiating the social contract that justified it. A degree was never supposed to guarantee success, but it was supposed to guarantee a chance. For many graduates today, even that modest expectation feels increasingly out of reach. The phrase entry level has quietly lost its meaning. What was once a starting point has become a contradiction. Today, many so-called entry-level roles demand 2 to 3 years of prior experience, multiple internships, and a portfolio that suggests full-time professional work. These expectations would have sounded absurd to previous generations. Now they are routine, casually listed under job descriptions that still offer salaries barely sufficient to cover rent in major cities. This creates a loop that is mathematically impossible to escape. You need experience to get a job. You need a job to get experience. For students without family wealth or insider access, the only workaround is unpaid or underpaid labor. Internships that do not cover living costs. Side jobs stacked on top of full-time study. Long commutes, chronic exhaustion. The system quietly selects for those who can afford to work for free. Recent labor market analysis shows that early career roles are among the fastest shrinking categories in white-collar employment, with companies automating junior tasks, consolidating teams, and redistributing workload upward rather than training new hires. This is not about laziness or entitlement. It is about structural disappearance. The first rung of the career ladder is being removed. Technology accelerates this process. Software can now perform tasks that once justified hiring a junior analyst, assistant, or coordinator. Instead of replacing senior workers, automation often eliminates the need for beginners. The result is a workforce with fewer on-ramps and more dead ends. Experience becomes scarce, not because people refuse to work, but because there are fewer places left to start. For Harvard graduates, this reality is particularly jarring. They arrive with expectations shaped by decades of precedent. They expect doors to open at least a crack. Instead, they find locked systems demanding proof of work they were never given the chance to do. The prestige of the institution does not change the math. It only sharpens the disappointment. Data released recently indicates that employers increasingly favor candidates who have already held similar roles, even for junior positions, reducing hiring risk but amplifying inequality and stagnation in the early career pipeline. From a corporate perspective, this feels rational. From a societal perspective, it is corrosive. This is how a generation becomes overqualified on paper and underdeveloped in practice. Skills atrophy while applications multiply. Confidence erodes. The longer someone stays unemployed after graduation, the harder it becomes to re-enter. Time itself becomes a disqualifier. Gaps raise suspicion. Silence compounds stress. Entry level was once where potential mattered more than polish, where learning was assumed, where mistakes were tolerated. That environment no longer exists at scale, and without it, the promise of upward mobility collapses into a narrow gate, guarded by experience requirements that nobody knows how to satisfy. When hiring teams are overwhelmed, technology steps in. That was the promise. Applicant tracking systems, known as ATS, were introduced to help companies manage the flood of résumés pouring in from online job boards. In theory, these systems were meant to save time and improve fairness by filtering for basic qualifications. In practice, they have become one of the most powerful and least visible gatekeepers in the modern labor market. Today, almost every large company relies on some form of automated screening. Resumes are scanned, parsed, ranked, and rejected long before a human ever looks at them. These systems do not evaluate potential. They evaluate pattern matching. Keywords, formatting, sentence structure. If your resume does not mirror the language of the job description closely enough, the system pushes it down the list or discards it entirely. You can be qualified, capable, and motivated, and still vanish without explanation. The result is a hiring process optimized for machines, not people. Candidates learn to game the system, stuffing resumes with keywords, stripping away personality, and rewriting their work histories to sound as generic as possible. Those who understand the algorithm advance. Those who do not are filtered out, regardless of actual ability. Merit becomes secondary to compliance. Recent estimates suggest that a majority of resumes submitted to large employers are never reviewed by a human, with automated systems rejecting candidates within seconds of submission based on technical criteria rather than job readiness. For job seekers, this creates a sense of futility. Rejections arrive instantly or not at all. Silence replaces feedback. The process feels less like evaluation and more like erasure. Compounding this problem is the rise of assessment tools layered on top of ATS filtering. Personality tests, cognitive quizzes, scenario-based questionnaires. These are marketed as objective measures of fit, but in reality, they reward those who can guess what the company wants to hear. Authenticity becomes a liability. Original thinking becomes risk. The safest answer is the most predictable one. Recent analysis shows that companies increasingly rely on automated screening and testing to reduce legal exposure and managerial responsibility. shifting hiring decisions away from human judgment and into defensible algorithms. This protects organizations. It does not build better teams. For Harvard graduates, the shock is not just rejection, but invisibility. They were trained to think, argue, and analyze. None of that matters if the system cannot parse it. A résumé becomes a technical document, not a narrative of competence. Interviews, when they happen at all, arrive after weeks or months of automated silence. This is how hiring loses its human core. People are reduced to data points. Careers are decided by filters designed to eliminate risk rather than identify promise. And while companies celebrate efficiency, they quietly accept a trade-off. They miss candidates who do not fit neatly into predefined boxes. They hire those who do. In the race to streamline recruitment, something essential has been discarded. Judgment, trust. The willingness to take a chance on someone who has not already proven themselves somewhere else. In a system ruled by automation, the safest hire is the one who already looks like every hire before them. And that sameness carries a cost that no algorithm can calculate. As if automated filtering were not enough, another distortion has quietly poisoned the job market. Ghost jobs. These are listings that look real, read real, and invite real applications, but were never meant to result in a hire. Analysts examining hiring data in recent years found that nearly half of all job postings in the United States fall into this category. Some roles were already filled internally. Others were posted to create the illusion of growth. Many were left open indefinitely to build resume pipelines for hypothetical future needs. For job seekers, the distinction is invisible. A posting is a posting. Time is invested. Cover letters are tailored. Assessments are completed. Weeks pass, silence follows. The rejection, if it comes at all, arrives automatically and without explanation. Millions of hours of unpaid labor are poured into applications for jobs that never existed in any meaningful sense. Recent labor market reviews indicate that prolonged vacancy postings have increased sharply, with companies keeping roles open far longer than historical norms, while making no corresponding increase in actual hiring. From the outside, this inflates the appearance of opportunity. From the inside, it drains morale. The incentives are clear. Posting a job is cheap. Leaving it open costs almost nothing. Job boards profit from volume, not accuracy. Companies benefit from appearing active and selective. Meanwhile, applicants internalize the failure. They assume their resume was weak, their interview poor, their background insufficient. The system quietly transfers institutional indecision onto individual psychology. This has measurable consequences. Recent surveys show rising levels of job search burnout among young graduates, with many reporting anxiety, depression, and disengagement before ever securing their first full-time role. Burnout used to come after years of work. Now it arrives before the first paycheck. The cruelty of ghost jobs lies in their plausibility. Nothing about them looks fraudulent. They comply with the rules. They use the right language. They exist within legitimate platforms. And because they are technically allowed, there is little accountability. No obligation to respond. No requirement to close listings. No penalty for wasting human effort at scale. For Harvard graduates and others like them, ghost jobs turn ambition into attrition. The more applications they send, the more invisible the market feels. Rejection loses meaning. Silence becomes normal. Hope is replaced by routine. Apply. Wait. Repeat. This is not competition. It is erosion. Recent data suggests that declining trust in the hiring process is now a significant factor driving young workers away from traditional career paths, pushing some toward gig work, retraining, or complete withdrawal from the formal labor market. The damage does not stop at unemployment. It reshapes how an entire generation relates to work. A labor market that tolerates ghost jobs is a market that has stopped respecting time. And when time is treated as disposable, so are the people offering it. The system continues to function on paper. Listings remain plentiful. Platforms remain active. But beneath the surface, the relationship between effort and outcome has broken down. When applicants begin to suspect that many of the doors they are knocking on were never real, the problem is no longer just economic. It is ethical. And once trust collapses, no amount of optimization can bring it back easily. Artificial intelligence was supposed to make hiring smarter, faster, fairer. Instead, it has completed the transformation of recruitment into a system that prioritizes efficiency over understanding and protection over judgment. Algorithms now scan resumes not only for skills, but for tone, phrasing, and inferred personality traits. Automated tools score candidates on cultural fit before any human interaction occurs. Employers embrace these systems because they reduce cost, liability, and decision-making friction. What they quietly accept is the loss of nuance. Recent workforce analysis shows that AI-driven hiring tools increasingly favor candidates who resemble past successful hires, reinforcing sameness and filtering out unconventional talent, even when that talent demonstrates strong problem-solving ability or adaptability. In other words, the system learns to repeat itself. Innovation becomes collateral damage. For companies, this feels safe. For workers, it feels arbitrary. You can be eliminated for reasons you will never see, by a system you will never meet, based on criteria you were never told existed. Human judgment, once imperfect but accountable, has been replaced by automated opacity. When mistakes happen, there is no one to appeal to. The algorithm did not like you. Case closed. The irony is that this does not only hurt job seekers. It hurts employers as well. Teams become filled with people who know how to pass filters, not people who know how to think independently. Risk aversion replaces curiosity. Hiring becomes a defensive exercise instead of a strategic one. Over time, organizations lose resilience because they have optimized away diversity of thought. Recent economic commentary highlights a growing concern among executives that algorithm-driven hiring may be contributing to weaker long-term performance by prioritizing short-term efficiency over human capital development. The cost is not immediately visible. It shows up later, in stagnation, disengagement, and missed opportunity. At its core, this is not a story about Harvard. It is not even a story about young people. It is a story about a labor market that has forgotten what work is supposed to represent. A fair exchange of effort for opportunity, a relationship built on trust, a belief that showing up matters. That belief has been quietly replaced by systems designed to minimize risk rather than maximize potential. When education no longer guarantees a chance, when applications no longer lead to conversations, and when hiring no longer involves people, the social contract breaks down. Graduates are not rejecting work. They are being rejected by a process that no longer knows how to recognize them. The smartest students in the country are not failing the job market. The job market is failing them. And until companies relearn how to see people instead of profiles, this disconnect will only widen, dragging productivity, morale, and trust down with it. Thank you for watching, and let us know what you think about this topic in the comments below.